So, remember when I said there was going to be a playable test version of my game zone? And then, even to this day, there still is no playable test version? Well, that is because I did a few initial in-person playtests with a few people, and these playtests were mainly about the level designs we'd built for the first dungeon of the game, but I also needed to explore the evolution of my combat system over the last 6 months or so. And while these tests really showed that the combat has improved a lot, with all the changes I've made to animation, timing, the underlying collision code, all those updates have definitely been worthwhile and made the combat feel a lot better. But the other thing that I've been reading about as I've played more and more of my own game is that it seemed to be getting a little bit stale. And a lot of these playtests really seem to lean into that direction too. While it is now actually fun and satisfying to swing around the sword and hit enemies, much more than it was before anyway, it still is mostly just a matter of mashing the attack button until you win. And while some different AI for different enemies can help strategize around that, you can only strategize in a video game if you give players different options to perform different actions at any given time. Otherwise, there just cannot be a lot of strategy involved. Currently, the only choice that you have is to either attack or not to attack, which doesn't really allow for a lot of strategy or customization. And I think the customization part of that is probably what I'm gonna go ahead and tackle the most here. If you give a player a good range of options to build their own gameplay style, without overwhelming them of course, they will feel more involved and more engaged than just pressing the X button until the game ends. Even if, fundamentally, the gameplay doesn't change that much. The illusion of having different choices and mapping different abilities to different buttons, even if they essentially still do the same thing, makes the game feel a lot more dynamic. So that's what I have decided to start working on. I've already made an inventory course here on this very channel, showing you how to create an inventory system for your video games. Since I already had it in place though, I figured why not also use it for my own game. I had initially made this course mostly for educational purposes and because it's a fun system to make. I hadn't actually planned on integrating this into my game. But now that I have it and I'm looking for ways to allow for more customization, it seems like a match made in heaven. So I rewrote a lot of the code from the ground up in C++ as a standalone plugin, so you can easily reuse it in the future for different projects as well. I had seen some issues migrating my inventory system from the course into other projects, because it relied on the game mode using variables and some variables on the player character as well. If your player character or your game mode for whatever reason has to be a different class, it causes conflict, which causes you to have to go over a bunch of different places and replace a lot of like casting nodes and that kind of stuff. So now I've made this system fully plug and play, which makes it portable into different projects without any issues. Eventually I might even put up this plugin as a whole for sale once it's polished and battle tested in my own projects a little bit more. I'm adding a lot of functionality to this thing as I go along, as I realize, hey, I'm missing this, or hey, I need that. Things like different ways to query the inventory, get data out of it, track how many of a certain item I have, or if I have a certain item to begin with. When subtracting an item, also returning a value on whether that subtraction was successful or not. All these kind of things that you don't usually think about while maybe initially designing, but then while you start working with it, you figure, hey, I'm kind of missing some functionality here. And as you can imagine, setting up systems like this entirely from the ground up can sometimes be a little bit of a pain. It becomes fairly complicated fairly quickly. There's multiple inventory components in play here, multiple of which need to be displayed to the screen at any given time, and then every one of those displays is made up of a bunch of individual inventory slots, and if there's an issue with any of that, it's going to get really annoying to figure out what is actually causing the problem and where you can fix it. Just adding a bunch of print strings to your screen is going to also really overwhelm you with a lot of information that you don't actually need while looking for your solution. Which is where the sponsor for today's video comes in, because we're teaming up with the GLS plugin for Unreal Engine. GLS stands for the Game Log System and is an improved way to log data so that you can more easily filter and read it. So let's do a quick example of that. Every one of these inventory slots has both a reference to the inventory component that it belongs to, as well as a reference to an outer object for a metadata object to do with it. Those need to be up to date at any given time. If I move this item from this inventory to this one, both of those things should be updated. Traditionally, we could do something like just put in some print strings and call it a day and debug with that. But that can become quite bothersome quite quickly if you have a lot of things printing strings all over the place. So that is where the GLS plugin can come in. What we can do instead is we can print to GLS, which gives us a string that we can print, and we can give it a category. In this case, that will be the inventory category. Now you'll notice when I hover over this item over here, and when I pick it up, it prints out the character inventory. And when I put it in here, it will say chest.inventory. So I know that, hey, the code that I wrote actually works. If we go back into Unreal with the plugin installed, we have this little icon up here, which has an entirely new tab for us to look at. So let's dock that somewhere. And here we can see effectively the entire output log of the engine, including the logs that we just made. But if we make a new tab over here, we can go into the categories and we can filter on any of these categories, including the custom one that we just made called inventory. If you want to do some more advanced filtering, we can even filter on specific classes. We can move on to the next filtering option, which is specifically display objects. So now we get to look at the specific objects that are printing these logs. But if I only wanted to see the logging from the right inventory slots on my little preview that I had a moment ago, I can click on this and it will only show the logs from that. Of course, that didn't actually log anything. And even now here that we are in a full shipping build of the game, we still have access to those logs. You just have to press the Shift, Alt and G keys. And now we have a in-game overlay showing us everything that we had before as well. Now imagine building this out a little bit more. Instead of just worrying about the items in your inventory, you also have specific categories for specific enemies, for player-related stuff, for AI-triggered stuff. You name it. You can make a bunch of categories and you can very easily filter on things that are relevant to it. Check out the link in the description to see more about the GLS plugin, and thank you again for sponsoring this video. All that I'm implementing as I go through and actually use this system. And over time, it's going to become a fully functional inventory system that can be used in effectively any project. Now that I have an inventory system, I can also make enemies drop items. This means that the enemies have something different to do when they die, instead of just giving different amounts of experience points. I can also add items in the world, which means that I can create optional explorable branches of levels that reward something more than just a bunch of experience. In much the same way that the combat system used to feel a little bit stale, because you could only attack or not attack, the rewards I could give players in a level design sense were also limited to just experience points. So now, you might need to go out and find a specific enemy type. Combining all this with a crafting system as well, this will make for a lot more depth in the entire game. Because you'll need to go out seeking either enemies or optional side branches to get the items to craft whatever you need as an upgrade. Which brings me to the main point that we're working toward here. Now that we have all this item stuff in place, we can of course use this for things like potions, or mana restoring items, or maybe even strength increasing items for temporary purposes. But the main thing that I wanted to do with this is integrate the inventory system with a magic system, which is actually remarkably easy to do. I'm already using the gameplay ability system, so I can easily make unique abilities that do something magical, like summon a ball of lightning to strike nearby enemies, or shooting a ball of fire, or sending landmines to trap enemies. All of these are abilities that I have already made, and I'll likely be making a lot more. With the inventory system, I can simply say, hey, this specific item, when I tell it to activate, it has to run this specific ability. So now I can use the inventory system to create these magical abilities as items that can be picked up or crafted or whatever else I can do to create an item. So as I said, this easily creates a lot more depth to the entire gameplay experience. Because now I can send out players in hunts for specific items. be it a magic spell directly or a crafting ingredient for a maybe more powerful magic spell. So now, with a few fairly simple changes, my game has already become a lot more dynamic in terms of gameplay. It's given me a lot more flexibility in level design to create interesting things for players to find and explore. And with all that out of the way, we're now maybe a little bit closer to a playable test build that I'll be putting out soon. It's not quite ready at the time of this video coming out, but maybe with the next devlog, I'll be able to announce a public playtest. Until then, I will be working on adding more magic abilities and maybe finishing up the enemy that I've been designing on live streams lately, which you can check out twice a week right here on this channel. And while there's no public playtests going on yet, there is a Steam page that you can go to wishlist a game to help support the development when this thing finally is finished for release sometime in the mid-2050s at this pace. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. A huge thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,